looking out over this crowd, I was telling Wayne Law up here a while ago what an amazing sight it is, and standing up here just now, seeing all of you and realizing that in the New York Times, this will be described as a small group of right-wingers, numbering about 300. It is an enormous honor to be here tonight. I was watching the very patriotic opening, and by the way, that band was tremendous. And I noticed that this was such an old-fashioned American group that you actually pledged that we are one nation under God. A term which comes directly from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and was written into the speech by Lincoln while sitting looking out over the first National Military Cemetery at Gettysburg, in an age when they didn't have speechwriters and actually expected politicians to be able to think and articulate on their own. And I noticed that you sang a highly patriotic song whose first verse ends, "Land of the free and home of the brave." And I believe that that's actually an equation, that if we cease to be a people who are brave, we will rapidly cease to be a people who are free. And then I noticed that Wayne LaPierre actually had the notion to ask you, in an old-fashioned American way, to honor those who are serving in the military or who are veterans of having served in the military. And when they stood, you actually applauded. Clearly not. Which told me this was clearly not a meeting of a university faculty or an elite newsroom. And it made me think that I wanted to just take 1 minute diversion before talking about the Second Amendment, to say that if you think of those things, and you think of the fact that our liberty survives only by the courage of young men and women around the world, risking their lives 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, that all you have to know about the President's nomination of Elena Kagan is that she, as Dean of the Harvard Law School, took an effort to block the American military from the Harvard campus all the way to the Supreme Court during a war, and that is an act so unbecoming an American that she should be disqualified from the very beginning. And I say to the United States Senate, you do not need hearings. You know why she's not worthy of being a Supreme Court justice. And I say to the President, you have every right to nominate a liberal, but can't you, in the middle of the war, nominate a liberal who respects and works for our military, not someone who has contempt for them and opposes them? You shouldn't have said that. You know, somebody said to Harry Truman one time during the great 1948 campaign, "Give them hell, Harry," and he said, "I don't give them hell, I simply tell the truth, and it feels like hell." And maybe Republicans need a little more Harry Truman and a little less softness. But I'm here tonight to talk about the Second Amendment. And I want to say to many of you, and I hope I don't offend anyone, and by the way, Callista and I had a wonderful time at the book signing, and I do have a minor commercial obligation to point out that To Save America goes on sale Monday, although it was sold here today. And I encourage all of you to rush back to your hotel room and order it on Amazon this evening. But we had a wonderful time today. But I want to preface my explanation of the Second Amendment by saying it is not in defense of hunting. It is not in defense of target shooting. It is not in defense of collecting. The Second Amendment is in defense of freedom from the state. Now, how did the people of Mecklenburg reach the decision on May 20th, 1775, that they should declare independence? And what does it tell us about how the Second Amendment came to be? Well, the colonies had for 5 years been in a tremendous struggle with the imperial government from the imperial capital. The imperial government had ruthless and arrogant judges who continued to make decisions which infuriated Americans. The imperial government believed that it could tax people even if they didn't want to be taxed, that it could pass regulations even if they hated the regulations, that it could impose its will upon the people, that the center of power was the king, not the people. And so the Americans had been more and more unhappy, and over a 5-year period, tension had grown, and the imperial government, which was used to crushing rebellion, had crushed rebellion in Scotland, had crushed rebellion in Ireland, had crushed rebellion in rural England, decided that they would once again teach a lesson to those people who thought that they could be independent of the government and that they could stand on their own rights as citizens. And so on an April day in 1775, they sent an army into rural Massachusetts. And as David Hackett Fisher brilliantly describes it in Paul Revere's Ride, they suddenly were shocked because they didn't encounter rabble, they didn't encounter unarmed peasants, they didn't encounter people who were frightened. They encountered trained militia who had organized themselves over the entire previous year, gathered up weapons and ammunition, and who were prepared to fight the British Army toe-to-toe, and in fact drove it back into Boston with substantial losses. That was called the shot that was heard around the world, and it was heard here in Mecklenburg County. And so, being relatively impetuous and a county filled with people who had fled other tyrannies in Europe, the people decided in a matter of only a few weeks that they would send a signal to London. And so they declared their independence, a year and 6 weeks before the rest of the colonies got around to doing it in Philadelphia. Now, it's very important for you to read David Hackett Fisher and other studies of Concord and Lexington, because what's instantly apparent is that an unarmed people would have been crushed. Now, the Founding Fathers were all warriors, something we often forget and no liberal academic wants to admit. And I've written 2 novels now to try men's souls about Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas night, and one which will come out this October, Crucible of Victory, about Valley Forge and the creating a modern American army by von Steuben under Washington's leadership. The United States, people tend to forget this. George Washington goes into the field in 1775 and is in the field for 8 years. He visits Mount Vernon once for 1 week in 8 years. They fought the greatest imperial power on the planet, the most powerful navy, the best army. They had German professional soldiers as well as British professional soldiers. These were people who had won all across Europe.